In Red Dead Redemption 2, there are 14 different bounty missions Arthur and John can take in the game. Today, I'm going to be explaining the lore behind each bounty mission and how they connect to the main Red Dead Redemption story. So the very first bounty mission in Red Dead Redemption 2 is the bounty mission of Benedict Allbright. You'll learn about doing bounties in the game after Uncle tells you when going through Valentine in one of the very first missions in the game, and he tells you can go and do bounties to make a little bit of extra money. When going into the sheriff's office in Valentine, you learn that a lot of the law enforcement in the game won't really do the law enforcing themselves, and they'll instead pay bounty hunters to just go out and capture the criminals that they want to bring in, that they just don't have the time to bring in. You learn from the sheriff of Valentine that Benedict Allbright is a quack snake oil conman who is selling a lot of these miracle cures to the people of New Hanover, and they're actually instead poison instead of actual miracle cures. He's making a lot of money off this, and he's actually killed a couple of people who have taken these cures and not actually been able to recover from them. So for this, the people of Valentine have put up a $50 bounty that Arthur can eventually go claim after he brings back Benedict Allbright to the sheriff's office in Valentine. Sheriffs also tell you where Allbright can be found around the Dakota River by the Cumberland Falls, and they also tell you that he's killed more people than Landon Ricketts without even pulling a trigger, which is kind of crazy to me because I feel like there would be an even bigger bounty on him if he's killed all these different people, but I don't know, I'm not the person making the bounties in the game, and maybe they don't have any good evidence to say that he's killed all these people. So after learning all this information about Allbright and his crimes, you can go over and find Allbright right near the Dakota River by the Cumberland Falls, and you can find him on this little ledge above the river. And then you can go up to him and confront him about his crimes. While Allbright is initially wary of Arthur, once he does hear that Arthur's mom is supposedly sick and that Allbright is someone that is supposedly having this miracle cure that he's giving out to all these people, Allbright easily falls for Arthur's bait, realizing that maybe it's another person that he can kill with the miracle cure and make some extra money off of it. And he goes for it and says that he actually does have this miracle cure, and he's always willing to help these sick women because he always just wants to put them in a much better place. After Allbright tries to give Arthur the cure, Arthur drops his act and reveals to Allbright that he's actually going to be taking him in because he's been killing folks with the miracle cures that he's been promising to all these people. Allbright then says that he's a healer and just wants to help people, but Arthur can really see through this charade and sees that Allbright is just trying to say things to get out of it because he thinks that Arthur is this big dumb guy. Eventually he gets Allbright to the edge of the cliff and he almost falls off of it, and then Arthur tries to drag him up and bring him in for questioning, but eventually Allbright just falls and lands in the river, so Arthur has to go and chase him down the river and eventually find him. The bounty mission then progresses into this chase down the river where they teach you about cinematic camera, and you follow and you see Allbright going down the river and you have to chase him while using the cinematic camera. Eventually, Arthur can fish him in using his lasso and pull him into the bank, saving him from eventually his drowning, but Arthur does eventually tie him up and put him on the back of his horse. On the way back, Allbright just continues to complain and say, "Oh, you shouldn't have locked me up. I was actually a healer this whole time." But overall, this bounty mission honestly isn't my favorite. I think this is kind of a really weak one that they use to tell the bounty missions, and the fact that this is the only mandatory bounty mission in the entire game is just kind of weird because I feel like this mission isn't interesting enough to get you to want to do a lot more other bounty missions, because there's not really that much going on with it, and I feel like the lore, at least when compared to some of the other bounty missions and the characters in it, aren't all that interesting. Allbright isn't that interesting as a character that you go to meet, and there really isn't any backup lore in the game that really suggests that there's more going on than what you're told by the sheriffs in Valentine. So overall, I feel like this is a pretty boring mission, and it doesn't do a good job of setting the tone of bounty missions, especially when there are a lot more interesting ones later in the game that you can do that actually connect to the rest of the story. But when you do come back, you can actually find Sheriff Malloy with the lady he's having an affair with. So it is kind of interesting in that sense because you do get to kind of build on that. But the mission itself is kind of boring, and I don't think it's as interesting as some of the other bounty missions that we're going to be talking about later in this video. But after this, Arthur does eventually get his $50 and can put Benjamin Allbright in prison. So overall, Arthur can feel really good about this mission because he saved more people from dying. The next bounty mission is about Ellie and Swan, who's wanted for questioning in a matricide case, which is the killing of one's own mother. The sheriff then tells the bounty hunter that she's probably in Cumberland Falls and that she's not actually sleeping alone. There is probably going to be a man with her. Eventually, after going to the Cumberland Falls area, you can find her bounty and you can actually overhear her talking with her lover, who's saying that she's supposedly some sort of Black Widow woman who kills all the men that she's sleeping with. Ellie and Swan then tries to manipulate the man and saying that she would never do that because you're my sweetheart and I would never hurt my sweetheart. But you can clearly tell that the man isn't that naive, and he does understand that when there's a pattern of multiple different men who have disappeared and haven't actually come back yet, that the pattern's actually not that great for him, and that he's probably next on her chopping block, and that she's going to rob him and take his money and eventually as well kill him. Eliane continues to try to manipulate him, saying that she turned her life around when she met him, and that all these other men, they tried to bully her and hurt her, but he's different, and so with him, she'll always want to protect him, and she won't hurt him like she did the other men, because they tried to hurt her first. Eventually, the character can go and confront them, and she tries to get her man to protect her and kill the bounty hunter, but the man actually says, "Oh, Eliane, you should actually go with him and just go for questioning." And she actually stabs him up and kills him right there. Eventually, you can go and tie her up and take her in for questioning because while she does attack with a knife, I don't think her attacks are all that bad. She did one-shot me one time while I was doing this mission, but I'm pretty sure that was just because she had like a little bit of a run-up and maybe the attack did more. I don't know. It was kind of weird, but she tried to stab me in this one and it clearly didn't work. On the way back to Valentine, she tries to come up with all these excuses of why she actually murdered those men, saying that something just came over her and that she should deserve to be put in a sanatorium instead of getting hung because she actually just doesn't have the mental capacity to do it. She just deserves to be in a mental hospital instead of a regular hanging or a jail cell. Eventually, after this, she tries to go and seduce the player character by saying that you're such a strong man. I need a strong man like you to put me in the right direction. And just so funny seeing her continually get in a worse and worse spot where she just is murdering all these men and she doesn't ever think the consequences are going to come and catch up with her, which is really similar to, again, like John's life and Arthur's life, where they just think these are all things that will never catch up with them. They'll never have to deal with all the killings they did in their younger days. And it eventually did all catch up with them, so it's very similar to these missions. And I think that's why the bounty missions are so interesting to me, because especially when you play them from John's perspective, where he feels like someone that's fully outside of the outlaw life, and then he's being forced to return to that and deal with all these people that were doing similar things to him at the same time. It's just so interesting because it really is this nice contrast of, oh, these people did bad things and they're being forced to being hung, and John can just be a part of it because he's a bounty hunter now and he's not actually an outlaw anymore. Eventually, you bring her back to Valentine and you can collect a reward of $25. John also remarks on the fact that she killed another man. And it's also super interesting because Curtis Malloy, the sheriff of Valentine, says that there kind of is a shortage of women in Valentine and she probably could find a nice suitor in Valentine if she really wanted to. So it's kind of weird that she was going out here and murdering all these men unless she just had a vindictiveness against these men, which could be true as well. But compared to the Benedict Allbright mission, I feel like this one's a lot better because there is at least some sort of like background lore of all these different men who are getting murdered by her, and you can actually see it in the newspapers, and you can actually see it by the man she kills when you're actually taking her in for the bounty. So I feel like it overall is a pretty solid bounty mission. The next one we go to is in Strawberry, where we find a bounty poster for the criminal Joshua Brown, who's known for getting people in gunfights and getting them in legal gunfights, but then killing them. But he also has a couple times where he's gotten them in illegal gunfights, so they want him for murder and for a lot of these assaults of people. And the sheriff in Strawberry will actually warn you to not go and fight Joshua Brown. Joshua Brown is a guy who knows his way around a gunfight, and he probably is a really hard man to take in alive or dead, and they only want him alive. And they tell you Joshua is actually located in an abandoned mine called Barrel's Dream, which is in the Big Valley region around Strawberry. So eventually, after getting to the mine, you can see that there is this little camp inside the mine, and that I guess Joshua Brown isn't here. He's out pretty close because you can clearly see the fire is going on, and it does look like he's making coffee early in the morning. So you can tell that Joshua has got to be somewhere around here, but clearly he's not at the campsite itself because you can't find him. After a little bit, you'll see Joshua come in and say, "You got nowhere to go, bounty hunter. I know exactly what you're here for. You're here to take me in, and you won't be able to do that unless you actually beat me in a gunfight because you're in the cave and you have nowhere to go but past me and through me, so you're going to have to beat me in a gunfight." And the character will almost always try to convince him to go in easy, saying that they'll do something for the law, but you can clearly tell this guy does not want to go down unless it's in a gunfight, so he challenges you to draw, and you get into this little Deadeye bounty duel, and eventually I just went for his hand, shooting out his hand, and it's pretty easy to get him to stop. I think if you shoot his hand or leg, you cripple him. He realizes that he can't win the gunfight, and he just starts running away, where it is pretty easy to capture him after that. So eventually I captured him and put him on my horse, and then I did check out the abandoned mine for a little bit. I thought there would be a little bit more to it, but it is just this abandoned mine that does seem to have a collapse at the end of it, and it does seem like he's just living there for the time being because this is not a place where you want to live for the long term. So then you head back to Strawberry to bring him back to the sheriff, and the whole time he just complains about how you actually didn't beat him in a duel, you shot his hand out, and that's a coward way to do it. You don't want to capture a man and tie him up and bring him back to hang because you need to actually beat him in a duel, and that's the good way to go down. It seems like he's really obsessed with his legacy and the way he's perceived in culture, and I guess the thing with gunslingers is they want to die in a gunfight if they're going to die, or of old age, being undefeated in gunfights. So the fact that he is still going to die, but he's going to instead die in a jail cell. And he also just continues to complain about all these ifs and hypotheticals of, oh, you wouldn't have got me in my younger days because I was so sharp back then. And you're not going to be this good at gunfights for a long time. You're going to eventually lose your step and someone else is going to catch up to you. I really love how Rockstar kind of captured the desperation of a lot of these bounty characters after you capture them, because a lot of them just get super desperate and they either insult you or try to come up with a specific way to get you out of bondage and become free. And eventually you get into this little fight with these other bounty hunters who are trying to take the bounty off of you because they're saying it's pretty hard to get Joshua Brown down itself and they want to take the bounty for themselves. But you immediately get into this gunfight, and honestly is pretty easy. And after dispatching of all those men, Joshua Brown starts insulting you, saying that you killed all those men there and that you're not better than him. He killed men in the same way as John did in this mission, so they're just the same people, which is kind of understandable. I do think thinking that bounty hunters are better people than people like Joshua Brown is a bad thing, but I know he's just saying this because he's caught and he's tied up and he's trying to come up with a way to insult John in his last moments. And eventually, as you get back to Strawberry, there is some great foreshadowing of Joshua Brown saying that John definitely has a bounty on him and that eventually all this is going to catch up with him, which does foreshadow exactly what happens in Red Dead Redemption 1. I really love how the game does this so often because it really just shows how well connected the two games are in terms of the story, and especially how much Red Dead Redemption 1 is referenced in Red Dead Redemption 2. Eventually, you take Joshua back to the Strawberry jail, and you get your payment from the sheriff. I wish this one had a little bit more lore, but I do actually like the fact that the bounty hunters try to steal the bounty off you. The next bounty mission is the one of Bart Cavanaugh, who's a member of the Laramie Boys. You can only do this one in the epilogue. And Bart Cavanaugh is actually wanted for multiple crimes of assault, destruction of property, and intimidation. So he's doing a lot of stuff, and clearly the Laramie Boys are kind of an intimidation gang. They're not really out here to shoot and murder people, but they're just out here to intimidate people to get better deals on things and then make a lot of money from that. So I headed into Big Valley and I eventually ran up on the Laramie Boys camp and found Bart Cavanaugh there. And I went up to the camp and you can realize that all the people there aren't really on their guard. They're really all extremely drunk. So you can kind of just walk up to the camp and not be noticed by any of them while doing this, which is pretty interesting. It's like I'm right next to Bart Cavanaugh and I don't even have to do anything. I can just walk right up to him and confront him and lasso him. But eventually, while I was doing that, when I do lasso him, he finally starts waking up and he gets all of his other boys to start sicking me and shooting their guns on me. And eventually I cleaned them up pretty easily and took Bart and put him onto my horse and got ready for the ride back to Strawberry. This is one of the most interesting bounty missions because there's not really that much of a gameplay aspect to it, because you go there and there's not anyone to fight. You're not really in a fight with them. They're all drunk and just passed out and on the floor. And while you do get some nice conversations with Bart on the way back, John making fun of him for being completely indisposed while he went up and captured him, and just making fun of him for being completely pissed out drunk, it is kind of a boring mission because there's really not that much to do. I mean, you go up to there, you capture him, and you bring him back. There's not really that much of an actual story here besides he did a couple things to bad people in the area. And I know the point is that it's supposed to like build on the Laramie Boys, but I feel like it doesn't really do a good job of that because you just see that they're assaulters, and it kind of just enhances the point that is already shown in the epilogue, which doesn't really make it all that much of an interesting mission because it just says the same things that the whole epilogue did, in saying that the Laramie Boys are intimidating people and they're just trying to get people to sell, and then they can raise the prices and say that they've restored order to the area and then raise the prices and make a lot of money off that. So it really isn't that much of an interesting bounty mission, and I feel like it's probably the worst bounty mission in the entire game because there's just not much happening. Eventually, I got back to Strawberry and I got to the jail, put Bart in the jail cell, and eventually collected my reward, finishing off this bounty mission. I just wish this one had some more connection to the actual game because I feel like there's genuinely just no connection to the game besides enhancing the fact that the Laramie Boys assault and intimidate people. I then moved on to Blackwater and started going after the Blackwater people, starting with Elias Green, who is a member of the Skinner brothers and is wanted for the murder of 6 different people in the Tall Trees area and also skinning their bodies as well. After getting to Tall Trees, you eventually run up on a camp of travelers who seem to be flayed and skinned by the Skinner brothers and Elias Green himself. And it's just a crazy scene to be getting in a bounty mission. Of course, you know what the Skinner brothers have done to people, but it's just kind of crazy seeing this in the middle of a mission. It's kind of like a jump scare in a sense. You then get to follow the tracks from Elias Green in this area into further deeper Skinner territory, and I really wish they did this in more of the bounty missions because I feel like a lot of the bounty missions don't really have a lot going for them. It's just like, oh, you go to this area, you find this person. There might be a little bit of a lore or story to it, but there's not really all that much to do. At least in this one, you do find the camp, you see what he's done to other people, and then you can follow him into his own camp through these tracks, which is pretty cool. And I just feel like this gives it more of like a bounty hunting thing where you actually have to like follow him and find him in a place instead of just getting the direction from the map itself, because most of these bounty missions you just get the exact spot where the person is at and you can just go there and immediately take them. Eventually, you come up on Elias Green and his boys where they've already ransacked a wagon in this area, and they're trying to see what to do with the one last person left from this wagon who's a young boy, and they're asking, oh, should we just kill him or should we do something else to him? You can see Elias is the guy who's actually looking at the body, and he's saying, oh, we should let him go. And then eventually I was just like, might as well shoot these guys, give them all a little taste of the medicine of John Marston's gun, because these are just genuinely terrible people. And I feel like having a mission where you go and you take down a bunch of genuinely bad people is just so satisfying. I don't know. The Skinner brothers are just some of the worst people in the entire game. And I feel like every single time, and take away some of the hurt they gave to all these other people in the game, is just so satisfying. I eventually lassoed him off his horse, and I eventually tied him up and hog-tied him. But the cool thing about Elias Green compared to some of the other bounty characters in the game is that he does have a really, really cool hat that you can put on. And it genuinely is probably one of the coolest hats in the entire game. He does also get really mad when you take it from him and put it on, so that's also kind of funny in its own way. But I feel like this mission is one of the bounties that you have to actually do because you get to get this cool hat and because you get to take out some of the Skinner's brothers, which is just so satisfying. And on the way back, Elias Green just keeps on threatening John, saying, oh, I can do all these bad things to you. But it's like, bro, you're the one who's tied up on the back of my horse. What are you going to do to me now? It's like the judge is going to string you up immediately because everyone in Blackwater hates the Skinner brothers and they all think they're a stain on civilization and the society they're trying to build in Blackwater. So you are immediately getting strung up. So I eventually took Elias Green back to Blackwater and gave him to the sheriff to collect my reward for the bounty. And I feel like overall this mission is pretty solid. It just is a lot more interesting than some of the other ones because the Skinner brothers are someone that you kind of always want to just shoot and attack whenever you see them around the game. So it's like, it kind of makes sense in that sense, and like the fact that you can be paid to take a Skinner brother out of the world is just great. And eventually you kind of see Elias Green's hanging, which is pretty cool as well. It's just kind of nice to see your bounty actually being fulfilled in the game and them actually acting on that. So it is nice to see your hanging after that. And it's so funny because you can see everyone in Blackwater just genuinely hates the Skinner brothers with a passion. So they're like, thank you, bounty hunter, for finally taking out a scourge on society, a member of the Skinner brothers. The next man to get a bounty mission is Herman Zizendorf. He's a man who was stealing a lot of tools from people in Blackwater at the work sites. So he's going out there at nighttime and just stealing a lot of their tools and then selling them as a resale value type thing, which is pretty interesting. It is kind of a different take on the bounty missions when it's mostly like murderers or people who have done really, really bad things. And there's just someone who's making it a lot harder to build new things in Blackwater. And it sounds like a lot of people in Blackwater are also just extremely mad at him for doing this. But eventually, after it gets to nighttime, you can go and search for him at some of the Blackwater construction sites. So this is the area where they're actually making a lot of these new buildings, which are seen in Red Dead Redemption as fully completed buildings, which is pretty cool. But you can go check out these two different work sites, and they just seem to be solid work sites where there's a little bit going on. But after going to the first one, you see a little cat there and you realize that he's definitely not at this one right now, and the cat is the only one making the sound, so he's definitely at the other one. And eventually, once you get to that, you can see a man at the work site, which it looks like he's stealing some tools, and you can eventually go and chase him. But overall, this mission is kind of weird to me because I feel like it is genuinely so much shorter than some of the other missions. While you do have this little chase and running after him, if you do go in Blackwater and take this bounty mission, you can literally finish it within 5 minutes. And even though this chasing after him through the city is actually pretty cool, I do like it because it shows a lot of the city, and I kind of wasn't trying to catch him to see what he'd do. Eventually you do get into this little spot where he's on the edge of a balcony, and he eventually has to jump off because he doesn't want to be caught by John, which is pretty cool. I mean, I do like all the little set pieces in this, but I feel like just the fact that this bounty mission is so short and there's not actually like any investigation, you just go to these two work sites and then eventually catch him after chasing him through the city, it's just kind of boring. I don't know. It's just kind of a weird bounty mission. And I feel like the fact that it is so short and easy to complete just makes it so much worse than some of these other ones. At least the other ones, you have a little bit of time riding to the destinations and having some fun time that way. And I feel like this mission is so undercooked. I wish they could have just at least had more investigation parts, or at least if there's no investigation parts, have it be more of this kind of like lore where people around Blackwater are complaining about him before you actually go and do the bounty mission. Because I feel like this one just doesn't connect to the story at all, and I feel like there's just not that much lore behind it that makes this mission all that interesting. Like at least some of the other ones, you can see their connections back to the main story, or you can see they at least have their own lore, which is pretty interesting. And I feel like this one is just thrown in as like, oh, here's some extra time that you can do and spend in the game because you just want to complete all the missions for the 100%. And I feel like that doesn't really make it that interesting of a mission. Eventually, you take him back to the jail and you can get your reward, and you can stop him from stopping the progress of Blackwater and keeping it to progress as a big town. Next up, we have Otis Skinner, and this guy is another member of the Skinner brothers and probably one of their bigger leaders because it's named after him. But you learn that Otis Skinner is wanted for murdering a lot of people and for being the leader of the Skinner Brothers gang. And the police chief there also says that he's one of the reasons why he wanted to retire as a policeman. And that's probably the reason why they're sending a bounty hunter after the Skinner Brothers instead of sending a police force after them, because there's almost no way they could go out there and take on the Skinner Brothers themselves. But eventually you go out there and you find a Skinner Brothers camp in tall trees, and you have to actually fight against all these different Skinner Brothers who are all trying to attack you, and you either have to capture Otis Skinner dead or alive, but you have to fight against all of these different Skinner Brothers, which is kind of cool. It's like nice to have a shootout against all the Skinner Brothers, because finding like Elias Green and just taking out a couple of them is kind of lame in retrospect. And this is a lot better because it's like a full-on assault on a Skinner Brothers camp, which is cool. But I feel like this is just a worse version of the mission. You go to take out Uncle and save him from the Skinner Brothers, and this being just a kind of reliving of that moment. It's just kind of boring in its own way because it's just a gunfight with the Skinner Brothers who aren't really that interesting all themselves. But I also got attacked by this dog, which is pretty interesting. I didn't realize the Skinner Brothers had dogs that would attack you, that are like rabid dogs that are just attacking. I don't know, it's kind of funny. And just in general, I feel like this fight was pretty boring. I eventually was just shooting at random Skinner Brothers, and I didn't realize that Otis Skinner was one of these guys that actually shot and killed. So I accidentally killed him instead of keeping him alive, because I wanted to keep a lot of these guys alive instead of dead, because it's way more fun to put them in the jail instead and you get a little conversation with them. But I accidentally did shoot him because I just didn't know who the Skinner Brothers were and where he was himself. So I eventually actually killed him. And on my way back to Blackwater, a bunch of Skinner Brothers attacked me for avenging Otis Skinner. They wanted to avenge Otis Skinner. And I'm like, bro, if I took down a whole camp of you guys, what makes you think that I can't take you guys down when you guys are just coming up to me and riding on a couple of horses? Like, come on. I don't know why you guys would mess with John Marston like that. But just in general, I feel like this mission is kind of boring. While it is kind of cool to have these people trying to avenge Otis Skinner after you do kill him, it is just kind of a boring mission in general. There's not really much going on. You just go to the Skinner Brothers camp, have a little bit of a gunfight, and then go back. But I don't know. It is just kind of fun getting rid of Skinner Brothers. So I do think this is at least a little bit more connection to the story than some of the other bounty missions. But I eventually went back to the Blackwater jail and dumped his body and collected my reward for his punishment. Overall, this mission was okay in terms of bounty missions. And then you can also see his hanging if you actually do bring him in alive. And it's pretty funny because Otis Skinner just starts hating on the town. He's like, all this is going to come crumbling down one day. You guys are never going to be able to civilize everything. And it's just so funny because this is a pretty similar sentiment to people like Dutch and Arthur, where they think that civilization isn't going to last as long as it actually does, and that people actually still want to live in a wild land and have exploration themselves, when that's not actually what people want to do. But the hanging is kind of cool, and I feel like anytime there is a hanging, it does make the mission a little bit better because you can see the justice through yourself. Now we go over to Tumbleweed and start hunting the members of the Del Lobo gang, starting with Joaquin Arroyo, a man who is wanted for murder and a lot of other things. He's definitely a very, very bad man. And it's also interesting because the Tumbleweed ones aren't actually active as a bounty until you actually specifically trigger an event involving the sheriff in Tumbleweed. Eventually you get to an area where you find these Del Lobo gang members who are talking about this guy in their gang that supposedly has done something bad, and they're trying to either decide to kill him or to save him. And they're talking about this train that they're robbing in the area and that they need to go to the train right now. But eventually you do get into a little bit of a gunfight with them and save the kid. After saving the kid, you get to interrogate him, and he says that Joaquin isn't here, and Joaquin is instead doing a little bit of a train robbery right now at the moment. So eventually you can just let the kid go and say that you're going to go out and find the train robbery itself. But there's also a map that you can get that shows exactly where the train is that they're robbing, and you can open the map and it shows exactly where the train they're robbing is, showing that it's west of there. After a short horse ride to the train area, you can see that Arroyo is leading a group of Del Lobos to rob the train, and they're all extremely nervous because they want to rob the train as soon as possible, and it doesn't seem like the train's actually coming. But eventually you get into this little gunfight with them, and it's so funny because in the gunfight itself, the Del Lobo gang member says, Arroyo, run. And they're like, bro, you just told him our name. You told him exactly who I am, and now he knows who to go for. And after capturing him, you get to do a little talk with him where he's like, the Del Lobos are going to come after you, John. They're going to get you, and they're going to find you, and they're going to string you up just like you're trying to string me up right now, which is just so funny. It's just like every single mission is kind of exactly the same, where they're all like, my friends are going to get you, and genuinely just nothing happens. I'm sure the Del Lobo gang members, there might be like another event where they attack you for taking down Arroyo, but if you could take down all these Del Lobo gang members and catch Arroyo, I feel like it wouldn't be that hard to take an ambush from the rest of the Del Lobo gang members. But honestly, I feel like this bounty mission is one of the cooler ones because there are like a couple different steps that you have to go through to eventually find the bounty. I just wish this one was a lot easier to do because it's genuinely just hard to get the one random encounter in Tumbleweed to set up these bounty missions. I wish they were a lot easier to do, but either way, this is a really cool bounty mission, and I feel like honestly, it's one that's way more connected to the game and just feels a lot more fun than some of these other ones because there's an actual like story to it where you go and you save this Del Lobo gang member from the other gang members, and then you find the map and then you confront them before they rob the train. But after getting back to Tumbleweed, you can eventually collect your reward and put Arroyo in a cell exactly where he deserves to be and get your money. The next one is the bounty of Esteban Cortez, who is the brother of Ramon Cortez, another one of the Del Lobo gang members and one of the guys you actually get in a mission in the epilogue, which is pretty cool. You can also talk to Joaquin Arroyo on the way to going to your bounty mission, so it's like funny because you get a little bit of dialogue with him before going to the bounty, but you can eventually take the bounty, which is Esteban Cortez. And you can find that he's murdered a lot of people, and that's why they want to bring him in, and he's brought in dead or alive. So you can either kill him, or you can actually save him and bring him back like a normal human being. Eventually, you can find Esteban Cortez and the rest of the Del Lobo gang members at Gaptooth Breach, a mine in the area of Tumbleweed. But all these miners there and the Del Lobo gang members who are like overseeing the mine seem to be extremely impatient. They don't really know what they're doing at Gaptooth Breach, and technically it is like a gang hideout, so it's a gang hideout for the Del Lobo gang, but I don't know if it actually is like fully cleared out when you do this mission. But everyone here seems to be extremely impatient. They don't really understand what they're doing, and while a mine can be extremely valuable, I don't really think it's the thing that gang members should be taking over, because I don't think they know how to run a mine. But genuinely, these guys are yapping for so long and they're talking extremely loud, so it makes it easy for anyone to go over and hear exactly what they're talking about and what they're doing. But they're saying that Esteban is extremely mad because he hasn't been able to make any money from the mine, and that it's all turned out to be a complete dud of taking over Gaptooth Breach. And after this, you can go into the mine after taking out the guards outside. And going into the mine is pretty cool. I mean, it is kind of like a reference back to Red Dead Redemption 1, where there are a couple of missions in the mine where you do have a little bit of a shootout here, which is pretty cool. I mean, I do like the fact that it is a direct homage to Red Dead Redemption 1. This mission essentially is that. And you get to go down and find the Del Lobo gang member at the very bottom. And I feel like just the fact that it actually does connect to the rest of the story, with Esteban being Ramon's brother and Ramon being like a pretty big part of the epilogue and all those missions with Sadie where you're bounty hunting him down and he breaks out of prison and all that, which is pretty fun. I feel like this really is nice to connect back to that because it actually feels like it's a part of the main story because there's like a connection back to it. And it's not just, oh, a random Del Lobo gang member that you're just out to catch. It's like someone that actually has a connection to the rest of the story. But it's pretty interesting after checking out both of the Tumbleweed bounty missions. They seem to be so much more fun than a lot of the other ones, especially like Blackwater. And I'm like, why are the Blackwater ones and like Strawberry ones so basic when the Tumbleweed ones, which are all the way out here in New Austin, and a lot of the content in New Austin was cut? Why are these ones so much more interesting and more fun? I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing, but it is a pretty good mission. I feel like this one overall is definitely worse than the Joaquin Arroyo one because I feel like there's a couple more steps to that one. This one just you go to the area and then you fight all these people, but there is at least a little bit of lore behind it where the Del Lobo gang is trying to take over Gaptooth Breach and it doesn't seem like it's going that well for them. And of course, Esteban is Ramon Cortez's brother, which is pretty cool, like I said earlier. And eventually going back to Tumbleweed, you can take him and put him in a jail cell, which is pretty weird because that is exactly where Joaquin Arroyo was at the very beginning of this mission. So I don't really understand where Joaquin went. I understand that they want to have the specific cutscene happen for every single one, but I don't know why Joaquin just randomly disappeared. But overall, this is a pretty good mission, and I actually really like it as a bounty mission, especially when you compare it to some of the ones in Blackwater. And now we get to what, in my opinion, is the best bounty mission in the entire game, and that is the one of Mark Johnson. And if you just switch up the name a little bit, it could be John Markson or John Marston. And it's clear that Mark Johnson's whole point in the game is to reference John's life in Red Dead Redemption 1, saying that he's now trying to farm the swamp out by Saltwater Strand, which is pretty much referencing the fact that John is trying to become a farmer after his life as a bounty hunter. And they're saying that kind of everything's catching up, which is just so funny. It's just like everything is referencing John. And it's basically exactly his life, just done by a different person. And it's so interesting when you can actually do it as John itself, because Mark Johnson and John have some nice conversations, and it's so interesting because it's all foreshadowing. And eventually you can find Mark Johnson in the swamp where he is with his wife and his male son as well, and saying that he just wants to go in quiet and peacefully. He isn't trying to do anything. He's willing to go in for his bounty because he knows that people are coming, and he just wants to talk to his family one last time, and he'll come away peaceable. And again, this reminds me a lot of John's last farewell when he does eventually say goodbye to Jack and Abigail before leaving them forever for the last time. And at least this guy got to go out peacefully, because John definitely did not go out peacefully himself. But it's pretty interesting because he says something into his son's ear that you can't really hear, but it'll eventually foreshadow something later in the rest of the mission, which is pretty cool. But after tying him up and taking him on the horse, he says, you got to watch this, boy. You got to see exactly what your dad does and exactly what not to do later in your life, because you don't want to be messed up and be eventually hung because of something that you did back in the day. You actually should just live a normal life instead of being a gang member. After that, you can overhear the conversation between the mother and the son, and she says, Daddy did a bad thing, and there ain't no such thing as forgiveness. And that just really hits, because it really just reflects John's life, because John did a bad thing, and he tried to make himself a lot better, but there is no such thing as forgiveness, and almost always what you did in the past is going to eventually come and haunt you in the future. But after leaving that, there isn't really that much talking. Mark doesn't do a lot, but eventually he gets off the horse and he escapes, and he starts running away. And it shows that he actually didn't want to hang. He wasn't going to come away peaceable. He actually had an alternative plan that showed him getting away from the horse this way, because he wanted to live with his family this entire time. It kind of reminds me of a lot of the escapism that like Arthur and John would do, where it's like, we need to move away from this area because we have a lot of bad things going on in other places and they know us for all these bad things. And eventually, after loading Mark Johnson back onto the horse, you can tell exactly what Johnson's plan actually was, where he had a couple of his buddies come in and try and save him, which is actually exactly what he told his son to do. And that's why he was whispering to his son. He's like, son, you need to get some of my friends and come and rescue me when I'm actually going there. And you can see that he kind of gives up after that, because he's like, no, I'm so sad. And he realizes that he actually is going to have to die. And all of his friends also just died as well because of him, and because he wanted to just live a little bit more of his life, and because he didn't go in peacefully. But I mean, he was going to die either way, so at least he tried something at the end of his life as well. And genuinely, this mission is just great. I just love all the foreshadowing and connections to John in Red Dead Redemption 1. It just makes a lot of sense that they have a bounty mission or some kind of person in Red Dead Redemption 2 that reminds you of John's life in Red Dead Redemption 1, and having it be kind of this backwater guy in Lemoyne that's a member of the Lemoyne Raiders makes it feel a little less pity than you would for someone like John, who, at least while he was doing bad things, he wasn't doing them in as bad of a way as the Lemoyne Raiders were. But it is just interesting because it all reflects John's life itself, and even though that this guy is probably a worse guy than John is, it really does reflect his eventual death. And Mark Johnson tries to complain, saying, I was just living out on a farm with my family, I wasn't doing anything bad. And the sheriff actually says, you and your friends were doing bad stuff before. It's very similar to John and the Vanderlyn gang, because all of the bad stuff that John did for the Vanderlyn gang really did eventually come back to hurt him. And there's also some great lines by Johnson at the end of the mission where he says that everything's going to catch up to John as well later in his life, and that he can't go running from all the bad things he did back in his life. So it is just so crazy, all the different connections and all the different foreshadowing that this mission does for Red Dead Redemption 1, especially if you haven't played it before playing Red Dead Redemption 2. So it is just kind of great. This is also a mission where you can see the hanging as well. And again, this one just reminds me so much of John's life. They're saying that he can't run away from the crimes he committed. And even though he was trying to do some better stuff in the later part of his life, the crimes that he committed back in his younger days really eventually are going to catch up to him. And it's just an amazing mission. I really love this one. And wow, it isn't super like hitting you over the head on the connections between John and Mark Johnson. It is just a good mission. And especially if you can read between the lines and read all the lore, it is just such good similarities between these two characters. And you can see that Rockstar clearly played it out like that because of the Mark Johnson and John Marston thing and how their names are so similar. But overall, this is just an amazing bounty mission and definitely the best one in the game. Next up, we have the bounty mission of Camille de Millemont, a member of the Lemoyne Raiders gang and actually a Frenchman who moved to America and joined the Lemoyne Raiders. It's kind of crazy how a Frenchman moved to America and joined the Lemoyne Raiders, because I feel like French people and Confederates have got to be on the exact opposite ends of the spectrum. But I could see, I guess, if you just become friends with a lot of these people, they could really join the extremist view that the South needed to stay alive and that it was being denied its freedom by the North. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing. It's also just funny that he's French. But I also continued my way down to Catfish Jackson's, where he was last located, and tried to find his little setup down here because this is where he was supposed to be. Then you can find the camp that all the Lemoyne Raiders that he's controlling are camped at, and try to investigate it a little bit before they eventually come back to the camp after going on a little raid. After taking out his friends, I eventually captured Mr. Millemont. And it's so funny because he's saying that I fight for your country and I fight for like the white people. Like he's acting like it's a just cause to only allow white people to have things and not any of the other races, which is just crazy in its own right. He's like, oh, you're denying my freedom. You're doing all these bad things. I'm a French person. I'm coming to your country. I'm trying to help you guys out. And they're not doing anything for you. It's also funny because his bounty is so much less than he actually thought it was. He thought he was getting like $200 for it. And I think John is only doing it for like $65, which is just so funny. I don't know. Just in general, this guy is just such a clown because he's like, oh, I'm fighting for you. I'm not a criminal. I'm doing all these good things for you. And then you also have his buddies who come up and try and save him, saying that Lemoyne Raiders aren't going to federal jail, but they're honestly pretty easy to clean up with. And in general, I feel like this mission isn't all that amazing, but I feel like Camille de Millemont is actually a pretty interesting character, at least when compared to a lot of the other bounty targets. So I feel like in general, this is a solid bounty hunting mission. I wouldn't say it's all that amazing because the gameplay isn't great, but Camille de Millemont is definitely one of the more interesting bounty hunting characters. I feel like it's always fun to go after former Lemoyne Raiders as well. But eventually we take him back to his cell in Rhodes, get him ready to get strung up from the hanging and get our money from the sheriff. And he's also just saying that all these people are traitors against their own people because they're throwing him in jail, even though he's fighting for a just cause of letting the white people get back to where they were 30 years ago. And the last and final bounty in Rhodes is the one of Robbie Laidlaw. You actually have to go to a house and collect everything in the house before this one actually triggers, which again is kind of weird. I don't understand why Rockstar has all these weird triggers for some of the bounty missions, because I feel like the bounty mission should be something that everyone can easily get. But he's also wanted for theft, fraud, and assault on a deputy. So this guy definitely isn't a good guy. But eventually you have to go back to the house that you have to search to eventually trigger this mission. And going back to the house, you're looking for Laidlaw. And there really isn't anything in the house. I mean, you just have to pick up a couple of scraps to actually go to the house first. But once you go there, there isn't anything actually happening there until you go and you actually get tackled by these guys who are trying to protect Robbie Laidlaw because you're a bounty hunter, because they know that you're trying to get him and hang him up. Eventually, after that, he escapes out into these fields, and you have to chase him into the tobacco fields, which I feel like this is pretty cool, but overall, this mission just isn't as cool as like what you actually have to do to trigger it. I mean, the fact that you have to go to that house first to trigger the mission, and then you just go there and you get tackled a little bit. And while there are a couple cool moments in this, all you have to do is just find this guy and catch him in the tobacco fields. But after doing this mission, you can take him back to Rhodes, and just overall, this mission is kind of boring. I feel like the things that you have to do to trigger it are a little bit unreasonable, because you can go into that house, and then if you like don't pick up something specific, you can actually like not make the mission be able to trigger, which just in general, I feel like this mission is just so hard to trigger, and it's not really that interesting. There really isn't that much gameplay. You just find this guy, go to the area, chase him in the tobacco fields, and take him back. So in general, this is just a pretty underwhelming bounty mission, especially when you have to do a good amount of stuff to actually get it to trigger. But eventually you can put Robbie Laidlaw in his place that he deserves in the jail cell and collect the bounty. But overall, I feel like this mission is extremely underwhelming. Now we go to Saint Denis and aim for the last two bounty targets. The first one is going to be Lindsey Wofford, who is a Lemoyne Raiders commander. So he is a very, very top guy in the Lemoyne Raiders gang, and he is a big target because he is a $100 bounty. And eventually I made the way to the fort where he's supposed to be at, and he's hidden in this little hole over here, which is pretty cool. I mean, I do like this fort, and I do think this is kind of a cool place for the Lemoyne Raiders to be kind of holed up in, because of course they'd be using things from the Civil War, just like that's the same thing with their cause. And eventually you meet Lindsey Wofford, who comes with a couple of his boys who are out here and trying to protect him, and they're saying that doesn't mean much in a sovereign territory, which is kind of funny because I guess he wanted to create his own sovereign country here that basically follows the Confederates. But I quickly beat down a lot of the members and dispatched them, and I eventually made my way all the way up to Lindsey at this top of the fort. And eventually I made my way to him, got him, I hogtied him really quick, and it was pretty easy to get to, so like I feel like this wasn't the greatest gunfight that I've ever done, but I eventually picked him up after getting this health cure because there was a lot of different people here, like at least compared to some of the other bounty missions, there's like one or two guys that you have to fight off. This one there was like 20 different guys, so it was like a whole Lemoyne Raiders sect out here. And then also when I'm trying to like get down from the fort, there's a bunch of other guys that start attacking as well here. So I eventually made my way back to Saint Denis, and on my way back to Saint Denis I tried to stop at this railroad here, and Lindsey Wofford was just doing a couple of things, being mad, and eventually there was a bunch of Lemoyne Raiders that started attacking me, and they were coming after me. So in general, I feel like this has got to be the bounty with the most gunfights, and I don't really think this gunfight was all that interesting because I did just immediately deadeye them and get them all out. But just in general, I feel like this mission is a little bit cooler than the majority of the bounty missions. While it doesn't really feel like it's a main part of the story, this is just a random guy here. He does seem very interesting. I do like the fact that he thinks he could create his own government and that he's not a citizen of the United States, because I feel like that's very similar to de Millemont, who just has some like weird things that he's thinking. It just seems like all the Lemoyne Raiders just think in a different way from normal people. They just don't understand basic things like the fact that they're still a part of the United States and that their fight ended like 30 years ago at this point. I mean, it does make sense because they are the gang that is fighting for the Confederacy when the Confederacy has been done for a while. And it's just so funny. I don't know. I just love this guy. He genuinely represents the Lemoyne Raiders as these bumbling idiots who are still fighting for the lost cause, which ended 30 years ago, and just doesn't make any sense at this point because it would be really hard to turn the United States back into the Confederacy and allow those type of things to go back. So it's just funny. And this guy just says a bunch of random stuff. And I made my way back to Saint Denis, bringing him into the police station where I could finally go and collect my reward, which was kind of nice. And it is kind of funny because they never expected that Lindsey Wofford would get caught by anyone. And it's nice that John could do it because they weren't expecting to catch him. This guy was in his own state. He thought he could be protected from the rest of the United States and never have any justice come to him. He thought he was in his own world. And then you can also go see his hanging, which is pretty nice. It's pretty cool to see the justice finally being served to Lindsey Wofford. But overall, this mission is solid. It is nice to kind of clean up the remnants of the Lemoyne Raiders and really feel like you've stamped them out by the end of the game, which just feels very satisfying. And overall, this mission was okay. I don't know. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I feel like the gunfights are pretty boring, and there really wasn't that big of a connection back to the story, but it was more interesting than the majority of the missions, just because the majority of the missions don't really have that much going on. And the final mission is the mission of Anthony Foreman. This is a member of the Foreman brothers gang, and he is the man that was messing with Tilly a lot in Red Dead Redemption 2, so he's the guy that Arthur went and beat up him. And you can eventually find Anthony Foreman in the Poor Saloon in Saint Denis, where he's out drinking, and you ask the bartender where a guy named Anthony Foreman is, and when that happens, he eventually just scurries out the back door, and you can chase him that way. And while this chase is honestly pretty boring, he's pretty easy to catch, and it honestly isn't that far from Saint Denis. Like, you don't have to chase him that far in Saint Denis. This is actually a pretty interesting mission. I do like the fact that you have a character that is in the rest of the game that comes back for a bounty mission. I feel like that makes this mission a lot better than the other ones, because there's a real direct connection to the rest of the story, where Anthony Foreman, because of what Arthur did to him in the game, is eventually forced to go to Saint Denis, live in the slums, and not have a full gang to protect him. So that makes it a lot easier to catch him. There's really no one else out here to protect him. There's no one besides the people in the slums and the bartender, who of course are kind of trying to protect him, but they're not going to put their own lives on the line to protect Anthony Foreman. And it's just so funny because you get to hear him talking about Tilly Jackson and how he's scared of Arthur and he doesn't want anything to be done to him, and he just wants to live his own life outside of that because he didn't do anything to Tilly after the game ended. But of course, John is just bringing him in for the money instead. But there are a couple things I don't really like about this mission. I don't understand why the Saint Denis Police Department can't go and police their own city when they know Anthony Foreman is in the city. Like, I do understand some of the other bounty targets when they're outside the city, because you're not going to be putting your sheriff and your police department out to find a criminal who's not in your city. But this guy's literally in the city. You guys have a full police department of people that can go out there and find him, and you don't do that, which is kind of weird. And also, this mission is just extremely boring gameplay wise. While this might be one of the more interesting missions in terms of how it plays into the story and how it actually connects to the rest of the game, it is just not that interesting as a gameplay thing. There's no shootout there. All you do is you go and lasso this guy. You do have a nice little talk with him, and I do like the story aspect of it, but the fact that there's not really any interesting gameplay, and you're not even like riding out into a cool place, you're literally just riding in Saint Denis and nothing really happens, just makes this a kind of underwhelming mission for something that actually is cool and actually has lore and is connected to the story itself. But eventually John brings him back into the jail, getting him ready for hanging, and collects his reward. But overall, this mission is okay, I guess. I don't know. I think it's underwhelming for what it could be, but it is just at least more interesting than a lot of the other ones because there is a character that feels interesting and involved in the main story of the game. And that wraps up every Red Dead Redemption 2 Bounty Explained. More videos are coming very soon.